tell you a little bit about SALT as we kind of enter into this and kind of the direction of what we're going to look at tonight and tomorrow. SALT is a part of the Sunset International Bible Institute out of Lubbock, Texas. About a year or so ago, they developed what was called Mission America. It was a way to help churches in this country. Now, Sunset has been known for its international work for a number of years, and someone asked the vice president there one time, what are you doing to help the churches in this country? So he developed a program that he's implementing called Mission America. And the design is to help churches in this country. And a part of that is SALT, the Sunset Academy of Leadership Training. What we want to be is a resource to congregations to help them in areas of leadership development, not only to strengthen those who are in current leadership positions, but we want to help prepare the next generation to lead. On the website, there are a number of resources that are available to you. There are 80 plus lessons that are designed for Bible classes that can be downloaded and used as an ongoing training program for congregations. As well, you'll find our version of a TED Talk. We call it the SALT Talk. You'll also find our version of podcasts that we call SALTcasts. And we are also going to be implementing this year our first SALT Journal that will be a publication that provides academic and educational aspect of leadership that will help congregations. We're also starting, and we're going to have our first this year in April in Madison, Alabama. It's called SALT Shop. It is for elders and for those who would one day be elders. And the training program that's involved there is a regional event. We're really trying to find congregations that would be willing to host a statewide event at their facility to bring in elders from all around the state to be a part of a regional event that involves leadership training. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of the resources that are available there. And hopefully at some point we can continue to do some things with the congregation at Lehman Avenue in regards to the leadership development there at the congregation. Tonight we're going to look at the first of 4 lessons that are a part of this weekend. We're going to focus tonight on why we need to cultivate a leadership culture. Why does the church need to be involved in preparing the next generation to lead? When you think about the idea that about 65% of churches in this country do not have elders. Out of the 11,000 to 12,000 congregations of the Church of Christ in this country, over 8,000 of them do not have elders. The remaining approximately 35% don't have enough. In fact, Roy Johnson, who is the director of Lads to Leaders, says that of that percentage of congregations that have elders, half of them only have 2, which means they're one illness or one death away from having no leadership whatsoever. When you couple that with the fact that according to statistics since 2006, that in this country nearly 85 congregations are closing their doors every year, there is a great need. So why should we cultivate a leadership culture? We're going to talk about that tonight. In the morning, we're going to look at the idea of a growth mindset when it comes to leadership. And then we're going to talk about communication, effective communication as leaders. And then we're going to talk about the idea of cultivating a congregation where people thrive. And so I hope you'll continue to be a part of the whole weekend and some of the things that we're going to be talking about. We're going to start off very simply, and that is to define leadership. How do we define leadership? So here's what we're going to do. All of you have a big piece of paper at your table and you have a marker. And there are about 6 of you at every table, at least close thereabout. So what I want you to do is take just a few moments and I want you to think about and discuss at your table if you could pick one word to define leadership, what would that word be? And then once you decide on that word, I want you to write a sentence to define leadership using that word. Now, I've done this before, so you're not allowed to list out 6 different words and then use them all in the sentence. I know how that works. So pick one word. If you could define leadership, what would that word be? And then write a sentence defining leadership using your word. Okay? Take off. Let's pull it all back together here. I should have banned technology so that you couldn't look up stuff on your cell phones. I saw some of y'all doing that. Okay, so let's talk about the words that you found. What was the one word that you chose here?
We chose direction.
Okay. Direction. And what was your sentence?
Providing direction for spiritual growth and maturity in the church.
Oh, okay. So you chose the spiritual path for your definition of leadership. Good. What word did y'all have?
We chose direction first.
Oh, okay. So what was your sentence?
The direction of any project or person must come from somewhere.
Okay. Good. Leader. What did y'all decide on?
We did it.
You what?
I'm sorry.
Visionary.
Visionary. All right.
We expect visionary ideas.
All right. From your leader. All right. What word y'all use?
Servant.
Servant. And what was your sentence?
Servant is willing to humble himself and put others' needs before his own while not compromising God's word.
Say it a little louder.
A servant is willing to humble himself and put others' needs before his own while not compromising God's word.
Okay. Another spiritual definition. I'm anxious about working with this table this weekend. This is going to be good. You older gentlemen are going to need to listen. You're going to learn a lot from this table right here. What did you guys decide on? You had a good list of words. What word did you decide on?
Okay, shepherd.
Shepherd. Hold on. Shepherd. And what was your sentence?
Leaders must be shepherds to guide their people.
Nice. You also had down the word wisdom. I like that one too. I heard a guy talk about one time. He said, "You know the definition of wisdom? What is our common definition of wisdom? Proper application of knowledge." His definition was the space between black and white. He said there's so many things in this world that we see as they're either black or white, but he said wisdom is knowing what to do with that space between those things that aren't black or white. I thought that was really cool. What was the word you guys decided in the back here? Example. And what was your sentence using that word?
A leader shows the way by example.
Leader shows the way by example. Okay.
After much debate, we just finally decided on the example.
So we have two examples. And your sentence was?
Leadership is providing an example that makes everyone else better.
Okay, good. Like that too. What was your word?
Our word was vision.
Vision. Okay. And what was your sentence?
A leader is one who has the foresight to think proactively instead of reactively.
Ooh, interesting. I like that. Good. Yeah. What was your word back here at this other table?
We were servant.
Servant. Okay. And what was your sentence?
Servant is passionate about their cause, leading with a humble example.
Okay. Incorporate several words. You know, the reason I do this exercise, and it was kind of funny because I was texting, and tell me your name?
Barrett.
Barrett says, this is hard. And I'm like, it really is. When you think about how do you define leadership, and can you define it in one word? Several years ago, I did some research looking at the history of our country for the last 100 years. I started in 1920, came to the present, and I was looking at the president who served the longest during that decade. So I looked at 1920s and the 1930s, and I realized some decades we had 2 and sometimes 3 presidents, but I wanted to know who served the longest, and I wanted to look at what were they dealing with, what were they facing, what was going on in this country, what was going on in the world. And then I looked at how was leadership defined during that period of time. And it was baffling to me to see how the definition of leadership changed with each decade. And a lot of the definition was influenced by the direction of what was going on in this world or specifically within this country during that period of time, whether it was a world war, or whether it was the Depression, or whether it was some other movement that was taking place in this country. And definitions, some of them were so convoluted you could read them and you'd be like, what? And others were as simple as leadership is influence. And so when you think about it, it is challenging. And here's the other point. Just in a room this size with this many men, generally speaking, we came up with 6 different terms that we would use to define leadership. And here's what's challenging about that. When you're talking about a congregation, you say, we need to look out from among ourselves and we need to select men who will lead. Well, guess what? Everybody has a different definition of leadership, and so when they're looking for someone, they're struggling to figure out who meets my definition of leadership. And so we've struggled in this area in some great ways. Now, when I think about defining leadership, there are a number of different thoughts that come to mind, but one that really stood out to me, I heard about not too long ago, that I thought was incredible. It's found in Esther chapter 10, verse 3. If you want to turn over there, you can look at that. It's the last verse in the book of Esther. Esther chapter 10, verse 3. Now, to give you a little background, most of you probably know the story of Esther. You have King Ahasuerus, and he was the king of Persia. They were the ruling empire during this period of time. And he and his council, his army commanders, they all come together. They're having this big party. And he calls for his wife, Queen Vashti, to come, and she doesn't come. And so because of that, she didn't want to be paraded in front of a group of men who had been drinking for 7 days. And the king says, we got to do something about this. And he got together his leaders and said, what do we do about this? Because something had to be done, because if you don't do something about it, guess what? All the lives in the kingdom are going to rebel. And so he ended up putting her away. So there had to be a selection process for another queen. Well, through a series of events, Esther was the one who ultimately was selected. Now, Esther had a relative by the name of Mordecai. Mordecai, being a Jew, understood who God was. And what was interesting is that King Ahasuerus had a right-hand man by the name of Haman. Haman was one of those kind of leaders that was a little bit on the arrogant side and felt like that everybody should bow down to him when he walked through or rode through the streets. And everybody did. But one man, Mordecai. Mordecai would not bow down to Haman. And Haman hated him and hated the Jews for it. So he devised a plan in which he was going to get Mordecai hanged. Built this gallows. Now here's how arrogant Haman was. He didn't just build a gallows to put over here in the corner. He built one that was 75 feet tall. You think he wanted to show people who was in charge? But it didn't work in his favor. Ultimately, what happens is he's going to be hanged on those gallows, and Mordecai is going to be placed second in command over the empire. And when we get down to the very last verse in Esther, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of this because I'm going to use it as a part of the definition for leadership for us. When we think about what was going on, and here's Mordecai second in command and the favor that he had among all the people, and then it says this: leadership works for the good of the people and speaks up for their welfare. That's what it tells us that Mordecai did. And so when we think about leadership, when we're looking out from among the congregation and we're thinking about who would be a good leader, you can tell because anyone who is working for the good of the people and speaks up for their welfare, that's a leader. And that's what we need to be looking for. Because we need people who care about the church, who love the church, and who are going to speak up for the welfare of the church. That's leadership. At least, I think it's a great definition for us to start with. As I mentioned earlier, there is a great crisis that we're facing in the church today. About 20 years ago, Neil might be able to tell us the exact date, but somewhere around 20 years ago, Wendell Winkler wrote a book entitled Leadership, the Crisis of Our Time. And, I know that it was a crisis then, but I can't help but think how prophetic in nature this book was, and the application of it as he wrote about the challenges of getting men to serve as leaders in the church. And certainly as we look at the 21st century. Just recently, in fact a little over a year ago, Barna Research Group did a survey with over 15,000 individuals between the ages of 18 and 35. And they were asking them about the situation in our country and about leadership. And I find it fascinating that 82% of those who were surveyed agree with the fact that we are facing a crisis of leadership when it comes to our country. And then as I begin to look at this middle section, what do you think are the biggest challenges to leadership in society today? And then they talk about, well, everyone is too busy and distracted, and there are a number of different reasons there. But the one that had 38% that really stood out to me, and I think this is telling of what we're finding in the church, older adults are not letting younger leaders actually lead. There are a number of factors that I think play into that. But when we think about the church and the survival of the church beyond us, how are we going to cultivate a culture of leadership within the church that's going to help us turn this around so that we're going to have men to select from to be those who serve as shepherds of God's people? I don't know about here at Lehman Avenue. I only know about congregations that I've talked to and been a part of in my life. And in my 58 years of living on this earth, here's basically the way that I've seen it done. We need some elders. Well, what do you think? Well, let's kind of look out among the congregation. You see anybody you think is qualified? Well, you got Harry over here. He's a pretty good guy. Yeah, but I don't think he's qualified. Well, what about Joe over here? Well, he's a pretty good businessman. His kids are all Christians. I don't know. I don't think he's ever taught a Bible class before. I'm not sure if he's qualified or not. Of all of the congregations that I have visited with, I know of two that have an ongoing program for developing the next generation to lead God's people. David Kinnaman is the president of Barna Research Group. And they've been doing a lot of research with this group that they call the Connected Generation, this group of 18 to 35-year-olds, which we often refer to as millennials. And what's interesting is he said this: the Connected Generation is looking for the church to provide real, tangible, meaningful opportunities for development. They want the church to be a laboratory of leadership, not just a place for spirituality. And I want you to think about that last statement. Here we've got a group of people between the ages of 18 and 35, and what they're looking for the church to do is to provide a laboratory of leadership. They want to learn how to lead, not just for the church to be a place of spirituality. Can you imagine what it would do in the communities if the church was known as being the place where you learn to be a leader in your home, in the world, and in the church? You see, those are the only three possibilities: home, world, and church. What if the church were that place where people knew that they could go and get the training to be leaders? He went on to say that based upon U.S. data, we know that institutions in general and churches in particular are performing below replacement levels when it comes to identifying and preparing new leaders. And then he went on to say this: if we're not making room for younger leaders today, they will not be around tomorrow. And that's what we're seeing. Now, another individual who is a part of this research by the name of Stephen Foster went on to say this: one of the things I fear about the church is that generally speaking, the church will naturally go up in age and inward in focus, and it's only intentionally that it will go downward in age and outward in focus. And you know as well as I do, when we look around this country, it's rare to see a table like this one right here. These young men right here that we see at an event like this. What we're seeing in churches is that we're getting older and we become inward in our focus. We're becoming very protective and preservative when it comes to what we're trying to accomplish. We're not going down in age and outward in focus. And we're going to have to correct that, because to me, as he points out here, it's only when we intentionally go downward in age and outward in focus that we're going to see the future change. That's why we need to cultivate this leadership culture. He went on to say, so we want to go down and out, not up and in. And one of the ways that we can do that is by spotting and raising up and releasing people into their leadership potential. Now, the last part of this phrase is where we're going to focus on tonight. How do we spot and raise up and release people into their leadership potential? I mean, if we're looking around the room, who is a leader? How do we identify them? How do we raise them up and release them into reaching their potential as a leader in God's church? Because I'm telling you, it does not happen by accident. We don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I'm qualified to be an elder. It doesn't happen that way. We've got to be very intentional in our efforts in training men to serve in the Lord's church the way that God intended them to do. And that's going to take work on our part. So, I want to share with you a number of books over the weekend that I hope you will be encouraged to purchase at some point and read. One of which to me is one of the foundational books that I use is Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck's book, Designed to Lead. In this book, they talk about a number of different areas, but one of the things that they identify is that in order for us to cultivate a leadership culture, we're going to have to come to grips with this idea of change. We don't like change. We're resistant to change. And what's fascinating to me is we do everything in our power to try to stop it. We want to prevent change. Because somehow in our minds we've convinced ourselves that change is bad. And some change is bad. But not all change is bad. And it's fascinating to me that we're so adverse to this idea of change, and yet we preach it every week. We just don't call it change. We have a different word we use. It's called repentance. But we don't use that word in our English language. I don't tell my wife, I thought about going to the store, but I repented. We don't do that. But the word means change. Change of mind, change of will, change of action. And I asked a guy one time, why do we do that? And he said, because repentance, we've already done that, so we are not scared of that word anymore. And it's like, well, we've missed something, because the Christian life is about continually living a life of repentance, of change. Because if we grow, we're changing. And if we're not changing, we're not growing. And that's a bad place to be. So when we think about this idea, I love the quote that they use in this book by Tom Peters. It's easier to kill an organization than it is to change it. And there's a lot of truth to that. Because people do not like change. And I'm telling you, I don't like it either. I'm a routine guy. I like to get up at the same time every day. I have the same practice every morning when I get up. I like to go to work at the same time every day. I like the routine of knowing what I'm going to do during the day. I go to bed at the same time every night. And on the way out here, I started getting a little stressed just thinking about the fact there are going to be guys out there going to want to stay up later in my bedtime. I know how that works on these offensives. Who came up with that? I like that, this leadership offensive, And so I like that. I don't like to change it. I mean, the one night of the year, some of you guys, I was here for the New Year's Eve party. I'm over there going, why are we playing this crazy game? I could be in the bed sleeping. But you see, change is happening. And sometimes it's happening so fast we can't keep up with it, and it scares us. Doesn't it make sense that we would want to in some way be able to direct and navigate that change in a biblical way? that's going to produce good things. That's why I like this quote from Tony Richards, who wrote an article entitled 5 Leadership Danger Zones. He said, change must be intentional for positive transformation, not just change for change's sake. I'm not talking about the idea we need to change just so we can say we changed. That's crazy. We need to be intentional about directing and guiding the aspect of the changes that take place so that it results in positive transformation. That's what we're looking for. So Geiger and Peck wrote this book, and what they define and identify in this book, the premise of it, is that the church was designed to lead. The church was intended by God to be a place where people learn about leadership. Leadership in the home, leadership in the world, and leadership in the church. We need husbands who know how to be husbands and they know how to be fathers. When you look at the country in which we live, it doesn't take long to see the breakdown that's happening in the home and the destructive nature of it, that's not only happening to the church, but our country as a whole. We need leadership in the home the way God designed it. We need men who will be men. We need leadership in the world. We are to be the salt and light, right? That's influence. That's leadership. We need to be the leaders. I mean, of all people in the world, if it were not for Christians, can you imagine a world without Christianity? I don't want to. It would not be a very welcome place, I would think, where everybody was after seeking their own self-interest and agenda. And our country is moving in that direction. We need to be salt and light. And we need leaders in the church. God has always required there to be leadership in the church. And so they have these 3 words. The idea of conviction, culture, and constructs. Now, when we talk about conviction, this is the statement they make. Developing leaders must be a burning passion, a non-negotiable part of the vision of a local church and her leaders, or it will never become a reality. We need to have the conviction that that's what we're designed to do. Every program, everything that we do is about preparing people to be leaders, either in their home, in the world, or in the church. And by culture, we're talking about the shared beliefs and values that drive the behavior of a group of people. When leadership development is in the culture, it is part of the very core identity of the church. Now, there's a reason why I don't tell people my educational background, because it really doesn't mean much other than the fact that I read a whole lot of stuff. But my degree was in intercultural studies with an emphasis on adult leadership development. And what was interesting about those studies about culture is how diverse culture really is, even within the same context. I mean, the culture in Kentucky is different than the culture in Louisiana. I can promise you that. It's different. The culture from California to the culture in Virginia is different. And the culture from one country to the next is different. Sometimes the culture within a city is different from one side of the tracks to the other. And even within the church, we create a cultural element. And sometimes those cultures are different. I mean, the culture at Mount Pleasant is going to be different than the culture at Lincoln Avenue. Now, there are going to be some similarities, but the people are different. And so they create a culture of shared beliefs and values and ideas that are shared among that particular group of people. But when leadership development becomes a part of the culture, it becomes a part of our identity. It's who people identify us as. That there's a group of people that they're involved in preparing people to lead in the home, in the world, and in the church. And then, by constructs, we're talking about the systems, processes, programs that help develop leaders. Having a conviction for leadership development without the tools to systematize the practices results oftentimes in frustration. So I want us to back up, and I want us to talk about culture. I want us to talk about culture for just a moment, because this, to me, is the key. While we need to have the conviction is one thing, creating a culture is something completely different. There are 2 types of cultures. There is a healthy culture and there is an unhealthy culture. A healthy culture is one that's going to be involved in developing leaders. And an unhealthy culture does not. Now, what they do is they present this pyramid formula, if you will, and this pyramid formula has a foundational piece which involves our actual beliefs and values. It's the very core of who we are, what we believe and what we place value upon. The second tier of this has to do with articulated beliefs and values. Now here's what's interesting. Sometimes we articulate things that aren't really our actual beliefs and values. We articulate them, but we don't really believe them. For example, we might articulate that we believe that we need to be about leadership development when it comes to the church. But in actuality, we don't really believe that because we're not doing anything about it. And that's where the third tier comes. And that is the artifacts. That's the terminology that they use in this book. This is the visible, tangible things that are being done to show our actual beliefs and values. And these articulated, or these ideas of artifacts or the tangible things that we do can be anything from VBS to gospel meetings to ladies' days to men's retreats, men's offensives. I mean, all of those things. These are tangible areas that we're involved in to show what we actually believe and what we place value upon. So what we have to do is create a culture where our actual beliefs and values are what we are articulating, and that we produce, if you will, the artifacts, the tangible evidences that this is what we do. And that's what this is all about. So, with that in mind, here's what I'd like for us to do. We're going to take about 10 minutes to do this. And again, in your groups, what I want you to do is take about 10 minutes to describe what the church can do to create a stronger culture that develops leaders. What things can be done to help the church develop this culture of leadership development. So we'll take about 10 minutes, let you guys focus on that. And by the way, the sheet on your table is for you to write on and make your list on. And we'll come back together in about 10 minutes and we'll share what you've come up with.
What do y'all think?
Okay. Let's come back together here with what you have. Obviously, this is something you can continue to discuss in the future. Because we need this type of culture. We need the conviction that we're about training leaders, developing leaders in the Lord's church. But we also need to create a culture that does that. Part of that's going to come from the constructs that we put in place, program systems and so on. But how do we create a culture? Let's start on this side of the room this time. Give me one on your list that I can put up here. Say it again. Mentorship. So we'll do one from each table and go around the room because I'm sure there are going to be some overlap with these. But a mentorship program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about mentoring in just a few moments, but that's certainly a great way to be able to create a culture where you have the older men mentoring the younger men and helping them learn more about how to lead in their homes, how to lead in the communities, how to lead in the church. What do you guys have? Give me another one.
Just one.
Just one.
Find ways to encourage those that are transitioning out of last leaders
Okay.
into that early adulthood. They kind of pause right at that.
Good. So there's a transition period. Lads to Leaders is a great thing. I think somebody else had Lads to Leaders. Y'all have that? Lads to Leaders is a great program. But it goes up to about age 18. And then after that, how do they transition? So there needs to be some sort of a training, maybe, that you could put in place here to transition them from that into adulthood. Some kind of a program of that nature. What do you guys have down?
Creating an atmosphere that your
privilege rather than an obligation. Teaching those that eliminating the fear of failure. Leaders mess up, they have to learn at an early age that it's okay to mess up. You're trying, you're growing.
Okay? Isn't it interesting how fear works? I don't know how many of y'all know Josh Austin. Josh Austin is a missionary on the Navajo Reservation, out on the Pima Reservation, which is east of Phoenix, Arizona. And he is with a congregation called Salt River. One of the things that I've been impressed with Josh is when they convert someone, and they're at services that next Sunday, Josh just walks by and taps them on the shoulder and says, "You've got opening prayer." And he just keeps on walking. He does not give them a chance to say, "No, no, 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 no." He doesn't give them a chance. He wants them to overcome the fear right now. Get them up immediately and get them in front of people so that they don't have to be afraid. Everyone else is getting up there. So, get them involved. And so some way to get them to overcome that privilege of serving. I love that. Yeah.
A quick story that was brought up in our discussion. There was someone at this table who was very nervous the first time they did announcements. Someone else at this table told him it's the most forgiving crowd you'll ever be in front of.
Yeah. Isn't it? It's interesting to me. People want us to succeed, yet we're so afraid to get in front of them to do stuff. And everybody out there is like, we want you to succeed. We want you to do well. We're going to encourage you. The church is some of the most encouraging people on the earth. And yet we're so afraid to get up in front of them to speak. Public speaking is the number one fear people have, even over death. It's an amazing thing. Give me one you guys have.
Examples of leadership: be seen leading.
Eddie made the comment that leaders need to be seen.
Yeah. Doesn't that make sense? This idea of pushing people from behind doesn't work. They need to be gently pulled, led from out front. My son has a shirt that he wears that says, "Lead from the front." And there's a lot of truth to that. Lead from the front. Because they need to be seen. They need to be showing examples of leadership. We'll talk more about that in just a few moments. All right, I want to know the one that I asked you about. Tell me the one that's the helicopter. What was it?
Oh, we don't need helicopter leadership.
All right. No, see if I can spell it right. No helicopter leadership. Now, explain to us what that means.
That our leaders, we can't have leaders that are constantly worried about, how everybody's doing everything. I don't know, because if you're always worried about how everything else is going, you can't worry about the big things that need to be.
Are you guys listening? Is that not significant